Hello and welcome to World Talks. I'm Diana Skaya. As the war in Ukraine grinds on, American foreign policy is taking a sharp turn. Now, Vice President J.D. Vance's recent comments mocking potential European peacekeeping efforts in Ukraine have sparked outrage in the United Kingdom and France, while Trump's decision to freeze military aid to Ukraine has left Kyiv scrambling for support. And now the European Commission is pushing for a massive new defense spending plan, and questions are mounting about whether Europe is ready to step up in America's absence. Joining me now on TVP World to discuss is Anand Menon, the Director of U.K. in a Changing Europe. Anand, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Now, before anything, Anand, what's your take? What do you think about the conclusion of Zelensky's trip to the United Kingdom? Would you say that he's satisfied with the support that he received?
I would say on balance, probably yes. There were lots of fine words from European leaders. The proof will be in their actions. Remember, many European states still spend under that 2% of GDP on defense that they were meant to spend anyway as part of their NATO commitments. But I think Zelensky would have been pleased by the declarations of support from various European leaders, particularly as those came in such stark contrast to what happened in the White House a couple of days beforehand.
All right, let's go back now to JD Vance's comments on European peacekeeping efforts that sparked quite a backlash there in the United Kingdom and France. Do you think that his remarks were a misstep? Was he making a valid point about military capability? And if you can just give us a little bit of context, please.
The context is that J.D. Vance said that basically the European states that are thinking of getting involved in Ukraine are countries that haven't fought a war in 20 or 30 years. Now, clearly, in the case of Britain and France, who are the only European countries that have talked about sending troops to police a ceasefire, that is simply not the case. And one of the striking things is the degree to which across the political spectrum here in the United Kingdom, in virtually all our newspapers, this provoked absolute rage at the vice president for, as it was seen here, being disrespectful to British troops and those British troops who died alongside American troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. The sense I get about the vice president is he really doesn't care what Europeans think. He has form on this. He came over to the Munich Security Conference and said a load of basically untrue things about European countries and seemed pretty, never took those comments back. So my sense about him is he doesn't really mind how we react or whether he offends us or not. His is, as they say, an America first agenda.
And do you think that the damage is done? What can we expect from how the United Kingdom will later react to that?
There clearly has been damage done. There's been damage done to the Atlantic Alliance by the tone taken by the Trump administration. No one now knows whether Article 5 has any meaning for America or not. But I don't think that means we give up on the United States. Keir Starmer's been very clear about this. We need to try and persuade the United States to remain involved. If it comes, and it's a big if, because of course we don't have a peace deal in Ukraine as yet, but if it comes to peacekeeping troops there, Keir Starmer has been very clear. European troops can't do this without what he calls an American backstop. We have got to the point where we are so dependent on US military support that we can't even think in terms of policing a ceasefire in Ukraine without some American help. So as far as Keir Starmer is concerned, the important thing is to use diplomacy to try and persuade the Americans to remain involved.
Anand, that is my next question to you exactly. With what you just said, the UK and France are pushing this coalition of the willing to act as peacekeepers in Ukraine. But they do insist this needs US backing. But now without, I know what you just said, but do you think that without American support, is this plan, is it even realistic?
Well, there are two ways in which the plan might not be realistic. The first and most obvious is there isn't a peace deal yet, and there is no sign that Russia is willing to come to the negotiating table and to stop this war. One of the implications of the US stopping military deliveries to Ukraine is that the Russians probably see an opportunity there to take more Ukrainian territory. But if, in a world where we get a peace deal, that needs to be implemented, then I think it's going to be quite difficult for Europeans to police that without some sort of American backstop. Now, one hope in the UK is if they can get the Ukrainians and Americans to sign this mineral deal, then the fact that the US will have a vested economic interest in Ukraine might mean that they're more interested in helping us prop up some kind of peace agreement simply by the fact that there'll be American contractors in Ukraine. That will give them an interest in seeing Ukraine safe and secure.
So let me ask you this. I mean, it's interesting what you just mentioned there. How do you think Russia is going to react, though, if the United States signs this mineral deal with Ukraine?
Well, it's very hard to know, and it's very hard to know as well what conversations have gone on between President Trump and President Putin. The impression I get is that they're in touch regularly. The impression I get as well is that President Trump, unlike any of his predecessors, sees an equivalence between Russia and Ukraine. He's unwilling, in fact, he refuses point blank to blame Russia for the war in Ukraine. So I can only assume that if it comes to peace talks, then something has been arranged between Trump and Putin. It might be, for instance, that American firms have agreed to help exploit minerals inside Russia. I don't know. But what is causing a lot of anxiety in Europe at the moment, including in your country, is this notion that the United States seems neutral in this conflict between Ukraine and Russia, and that has historically just not been the case before.
Anand, I mean, all this controversy and all these comments with JD Vance coming up is coming up just after the U.S. Just froze this military aid to Ukraine. Do you see this as part of a broader American strategy to shift responsibility for Ukraine onto Europe? I mean, we've consistently heard Trump saying that Europe needs to do more, Europe needs to do more. What can you say on this?
I think there's a very conscious and explicit strategy on the part of the United States to shift responsibility for Europe onto Europe. So it's not simply a question of Ukraine. It is saying, why are we spending all this money to keep you safe? You have big economies as well. You're not spending as much as us. It is simply wrong that you are getting away with free riding on us. So I think that is a baseline of the Trump administration. With the suspension of military aid to Ukraine, it's partly in that vein, but I think it's also an attempt to drive the Ukrainians to the negotiating table. We had that awful scene in the Oval Office with Zelensky alongside Trump and JD Vance that, of course, ended very badly. And I think partly the suspension of military aid is an attempt to bully President Zelensky into agreeing that minerals deal, because he knows that eventually in the next few months, he's going to start running out of weapons and ammunition.
And let me take you to the Monroe Doctrine. Now, this was originally meant to keep European powers out of the Americas. But I mean, now we're seeing some experts argue that Trump's foreign policy, what it's actually doing, it's that it's echoing this idea, focusing on American interests and home and pushing Europe to handle its own issues and its own security. Now, do you think that we're seeing a modern day Monroe Doctrine in action? And I mean, what would that mean for NATO, for Ukraine? I mean, and at the end of the day here, what does Trump really want? Because I mean, if it's almost as though he's really giving in to the Russian to the Russian narrative. I mean, you just said so yourself that he has until this day not even mentioned a single time that he hasn't called out Russia for its war crimes even.
I think, to be honest, it's too soon to tell. I mean, we've got to remind ourselves that we're only a few weeks into the Trump administration. There's been a lot of words, and we're going to have to see what his actions are. But I think there are two sides to this. Firstly, there are signs that he wants to consolidate American power in the Western Hemisphere. He reiterated in his speech to Congress his desire to have Greenland. And was quite confidently saying, I think we're going to get it one way or the other. He reiterated his demand for U.S. control over the Panama Canal. Justin Trudeau has been absolutely clear that he takes Trump at his word when he talks about making Canada the 51st state of the United States. And of course, Canada is a U.S. ally, so we've never seen anything like this before. He is threatening Canada and imposing tariffs on Canada and NATO allies. So I think, Trump has a very different understanding of alliance solidarity than any of his predecessors. That in itself has massive implications, and of course it has implications for Europe as well, because if the United States is going to turn inwards and focus on its own hemisphere, then that leaves Europeans figuring out a way to deter Russia by themselves. Now, when it comes to Russia-US relations, we simply don't know with any degree of clarity what is going on. There's plenty of experts out there speculating that actually what Trump is trying to do is to lever Russia away from China, so to improve relations between the US and Russia in order to help try and isolate China, because in terms of threat or challenge, the number one priority for this US administration is China, not Russia.
Thank you so much, Anand Menon. This is all the time we have for this morning. Director, U.K. and Changing Europe. Thank you for all your insight. And that's all for this edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm Diana Skaya. Up next, news with Anya Kalchinska. Stay tuned.